Today we're going to talk about how volcanoes work. Why do they erupt? How do they erupt? Where does all that magma come from? How does it get to the surface? We're going to cover all of that and more today. So firstly, what is a volcano? A volcano is any place where magma reaches the surface. Nothing more complicated than that, it's just that simple. So the next thing we should talk about is the difference between magma and lava. This is something that people confuse, but both magma and lava are just molten rock. They're rock in liquid form. Magma is below the surface, and lava is above the surface. So they're the same thing, we just have different words for them depending on where they are. So every volcano's story is fundamentally the same, where you have some body of magma and it rises towards the surface, and where it reaches the surface and spreads out over land is a volcano. So if we're going to start from the beginning, we have to ask ourselves, why does magma exist in the first place? How do you actually melt a rock? That is a very basic question in geology, but people have spent their entire careers working on that, and at this point we have a pretty good idea of how you make magma. The basic procedure for making magma is pretty simple. First, you need hot rocks. Once you have those hot rocks, you can do a few things to them. Firstly, you could increase the temperature and melt them that way. Secondly, you could decrease the pressure and melt them that way, which is a little counterintuitive, but trust me, it works. And then the third way is you can add water. So water reduces the melting point of a rock. So just adding water to a hot rock could cause it to melt under the right conditions. So one of those three things, or a combination of those three things, will always occur to generate a magma. So you've made all this magma and it's deep below the Earth's surface, and now you need to get it to the surface to make your volcano. So how does magma rise in the first place? Well, that's pretty simple as well. Magmas rise because they are less dense than the rocks around them. They're a liquid instead of a solid, and most liquids are less dense than their solid form. So a magma is going to be lighter than the rock it used to be, and because it's lighter, it will rise like a balloon towards the surface. So once we get our magma very close to the surface, we have a problem. The air is way less dense than the magma. So all magmas should get very close to the surface, but they should never be buoyant enough to actually erupt onto the surface. So this brings up a major question in geology, which is, why do magmas erupt? It has everything to do with pressure. You might have a magma body sitting just below the surface, and it doesn't have enough buoyant force to erupt onto the surface. But if you have more magma coming up from underneath, it will push the magma on top of it out and cause an eruption. So fundamentally, there are two different types of eruptions. There are effusive eruptions and explosive eruptions. When you think of an erupting volcano, you probably think of an explosive eruption. But most volcanoes are actually effusive in nature. So an explosive eruption might be the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. And an effusive eruption would be more of a Hawaiian-style eruption, where lava just flows out of the volcano and there's not a big explosion or ash cloud or anything like that. Effusive eruptions are simpler to explain. Magma is sitting close to the surface, and more magma comes in from underneath and pushes the magma on top of it out. Explosive eruptions are a little more complicated. You have the magma body sitting close to the surface again, and more magma is coming up from underneath. But this time, the overlying rocks don't want to let all this magma out. So you develop what's called an overpressure in the magma chamber. And so this overpressure builds and builds until the rocks around the magma can't take it anymore, and they explosively decompress, which releases a whole lot of magma out all at once, and creates large ash clouds and things like that. So if you want to make your own magma, it's possible, but definitely not recommended. You'll probably burn your house down. There are some scientists whose job is basically to make magma and study its properties and things like that. And there are a few good videos on the internet of people making enormous amounts of magma and then like grilling steaks with them or things like that. I'll include a link to some of those in the description. Next time, we're going to talk about the different types of volcanoes and why most volcanoes aren't even recognizable to the average person. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below.